Welcome back to the world this week. President Obama has previously said that if the Assad regime in Syria were to use chemical weapons, it would have crossed a red line that would trigger direct Western intervention. Last week, it was announced by the Ministry of Defence in the UK and by the Pentagon in the United States that Syria had used such weapons. But at the same time, the intelligence was said to be too inconclusive to publish. Of course, there is already massive foreign intervention in both sides of Syria's bloody civil war. The US and the UK have increased their use of non-lethal military aid to their chosen allies in the Syrian opposition. So what does the future hold? Here's an update.
Obama called it the red line. But now that evidence has supposedly emerged suggesting the use of chemical weapons by the regime in Syria, there hasn't been any clear indication of what America plans to do about it.
What we now have is evidence that chemical weapons have been used inside of Syria, but we don't know how they were used, when they were used, who used them. We don't have a chain of custody that establishes what exactly happened. And when I am making decisions about America's national security and the potential for taking additional action in response to chemical weapon use, I've got to make sure I've got the facts. That's what the American people would expect.
It's hardly surprising that Obama is wary of intervening in a country on the basis of reports of WMD. The wounds of Iraq are still sore, and public support for intervention in Syria is low as a result. And while there has been plenty of rhetoric from countries like America, Britain and Israel, the use of chemical weapons is still disputed. Commentators have questioned why Bashar al-Assad would use mass destructive chemical weapons in such small doses. And the video footage that has been released of victims suffering from alleged sarin nerve gas attacks has raised some eyebrows with regards to their authenticity. Bashar al-Assad has allowed for UN inspectors to enter Khan al-Assal, a town near Aleppo, to investigate the use of chemical weapons, but has claimed there is not sufficient evidence to investigate such attacks in Damascus or Homs, and is preventing inspections from taking place there. Another headache for the West is the confirmation that the Lebanese Shia militant group Hezbollah are officially fighting the rebels on the side of Bashar al-Assad.
إن لسوريا في المنطقة والعالم أصدقاء حقيقيين لن يسمحوا لسوريا أن تسقط في يد أمريكا أو يد إسرائيل أو يد الجماعات التكفيرية.
There are also ominous signs of a build-up of US troops on the Jordanian border. A contingent of 200 troops has been sent with the intention to increase the number to 20,000 in future, including a contingent for special operations carrying equipment to find stockpiles of chemical weapons in Syria. As the Syrian conflict spills more increasingly over into neighbouring countries, many people have suggested that there could be catastrophic consequences for the Middle East if the fighting continues. Flaring sectarian tensions could lead to the breakdown of traditional colonial borders and lead to an uncertain and undefinable future for one of the world's oldest societies. Alex MacDonald, Islam Channel.
Well, joining our studio discussion are Walid Safour of the Syrian National Council, Dr. Webber Fattah, Director of the Middle East Consultancy Services, and by phone from Ireland, David Byrne, an activist and editor of the Syrian Report website. Welcome to the programme, all of you. So, what do you make of the report? I mean, it's an odd report, isn't it? Because on the one hand, we're told that the use of such weapons would trigger Western intervention. On the other hand, we have a report that isn't sufficiently clear to actually be published. What do you make of it?
We have to make sure, in the first hand, that the chemical weapon was used by the Syrian regime itself, and we have at least 8 incidents where it was used, and we have figures of people who had been killed or the other casualties, whether it was hit by artillery or by helicopters or by aircraft. This is for sure for us and the Syrian people, and we have casualty which was transferred as well to Turkey in order to be examined. We asked the international community to come and examine that. The United Nations has appointed a committee, but this committee was not allowed to come into Syria. The Syrian regime wants a committee at its own wish to support its claim. What the American administration said, it's none of our interests. Is our interest as Syrian people to allow us to defend ourselves, to lift the unfair embargo imposed on the Syrian people. This is what we want. We don't want anybody to come and to intervene in our affairs. We want the international community to lift this unfair embargo imposed on the Syrian opposition, while the Syrian regime has got shipments of arms from Russia, from China, and from Iran. This is the point. We want the international community to consider that the chemical weapon could be used in the near future on a larger scales by the Syrian regime, and many casualties can fall.
Okay, let's come back to that. Dr. Fatah, what do you make of this? Because it's odd to make a statement they've been used, but then not to be able to publish any proof that this is actually so.
I mean, from the evidence I have seen, unless I miss something, I'm not really convinced that chemical weapons is used in Syria. That's not to say that the regime Assad is not capable of using chemicals. And I believe, looking at all the evidence, and I believe if Assad regime is in trouble, in deep trouble, it uses anything they have in their disposal. But from what's published, I don't know if there's something not published I have missed. What's published, it doesn't stand in court of law that the accusation against the Syrian regime or any other side, for that matter.
Mm. David, let me bring you into the discussion now. Do you think that the reticence on this is because, you know, we went this path with the dodgy dossier on the question of Iraq, and the American and British governments are unwilling to publish another document which could be proven to be wrong?
Well, first of all, I just want to address the, claim that the Syrian government is in trouble and has its back against the wall. I disagree with that. In the last few weeks in particular, the Syrian armed forces have, had many successes on the ground. They've cut off supply lines from the Jordanian border.
Let's just we'll come to the wider questions in a minute. I mean, I think you could legitimately say that any government that's been fighting for 2 years against an uprising is in some kind of difficulty. But on the question of these reports, do you think that the reason why the governments have been unwilling to publish them is because of the shadow that they're under from the dodgy dossier on Iraq?
I would say that's part of it, but also because I think they know that they're not sure whether chemical weapons have been used by the Syrian government. And this is against the backdrop of, firstly, the Israelis making this accusation. The following day, it was, brushed aside by people in Washington, the Pentagon, and the State Department. Only today, Erdogan of Turkey, he's absolutely sure that the Syrian government has used chemical weapons. And, I think it's fair to question this evidence, this chain of custody, this evidence that apparently has passed through Turkey. There's so many questions, and I think the whole strategy of America and its allies is to be ambiguous and to be uncertain and to create this atmosphere of uncertainty.
Okay, let me just put that point to Dr. Fatah. Do you think that this is, I guess the point there is that either the kind of chain down which the information has come is so compromised that we can't believe it, or that it's simply so confused that we have no way of verifying it?
I mean, it could be both, or it could be that the information is available, but probably the Western countries wouldn't like to get involved in the Syrian civil war. Maybe it's that too. But and also, I mean, we are dealing with a different world now from the world that the international community interfered with the Iraqi affairs, if you like. It's a really different world. I mean, the economic situation is different, and America, or also Britain, has a very bitter experience from Iraq and Afghanistan. Maybe they don't want to be in the same position again. That's also true. But that's not to say that there are no interference in Syria. I mean, as we know, all the regional powers are interfering. Maybe that's the way the international community wants to manage that problem. But I mean, I don't really see why the chemical use. I understand why it's important, because it's crime against humanity. It's illegal international law. I understand that. But I mean, if you take in the civilian casualties, I believe it's high enough for some sort of international interference, whatever that is. I don't know.
If they wanted to, you mean?
If they wanted to. I mean, look at how many people are refugees? Millions. How many people killed? I don't know. Tens of thousands. How many people displaced internally? I don't know. The figures are very, very high. There is a case for interference. And I disagree with my friend. I think the Assad regime lost all the legitimacy, nationally, regionally, and internationally. It lost legitimacy, and yet there are, Western governments deal with the oppositions, you like it or not. But I think what should be on the top of the agenda, how to stop the civilian casualties. That is really the important. I mean, that's probably for the Security Council to decide, for the international community, or maybe EU, without America can get together. But as citizens of this world, we all suffer. We all become victims watching people suffering for no reason apart from that, because they are in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Well, I mean, is it the Syrian National Coalition? I'm sorry if I introduced you as the Syrian National Council earlier, but is it the Syrian National Coalition's position that more arms would help resolve the situation? Because many people looking at this may say that actually the situation has been worsened by, as Dr. Fatah was saying, a whole number of regional actors supplying arms to different sides of the conflict.
We've repeated on many occasions that the Syrian regime did not in the past respond to any initiative for reform at the beginning. And then he stepped up all sorts of the use of all weapons, including bombarding populated places. So what can we, in which way we can stop this continuous genocide, these war crimes and these massacres? As we have, it is not a, I want to comment on the belief, I believe, and it is not a matter of belief. It is not a matter of speculation. It is a matter of stamping facts that people have seen aircrafts coming and dropping bombs which resulted in the influence of chemical weapons. These are known for us on the ground, and people come to analyze behind the borders or in the USA or in the United Kingdom or in France that we believe or we don't believe according to their stance from the Syrian revolution or according to their ideology. This is a matter of humanitarian. People are being killed in Syria.
That's the problem, isn't it, with repeatedly asking for Western assistance. You are then dependent on what Western governments choose to believe or not believe about your case. So, I mean, in a sense, you put yourselves at their mercy. Isn't that an error?
And this is what we have thought. We have thought, come and see. The Syrian regime will not allow anybody to come. Only he wants Russians in order to support his claim that nothing has been used. This is the situation we are caught in. So what is the way out? The way out is to enable the Syrian people to defend themselves, to stop the machine, the killing machine of the Syrian regime. We have no other options.
Dr. Fatah, what do you make of the announcement of Hezbollah's involvement on the side of the Syrian regime?
I mean, Hezbollah's involvement with Syrian regime is not really new. I mean, if you look at the websites, I'm just saying what's been given. There's a long list of Syrian oppositions in Lebanon or Syrian activists in Lebanon have been either kidnapped, detained, or handed over to Syrian authorities. I mean, there's nothing new. And I think Hezbollah was involved from very early days, but maybe in the last week or so, they stepped this up and announced they say, you know, they're going to involve. But I think Hezbollah is very much involved with Syria. And I think probably that's part of the regional, if you like, alliance with Iran, Syria, and now Iraq. It's like a jigsaw, if you like. So more pieces add to the jigsaw. So as they say, that crescent will be completed. I mean, obviously, Hezbollah very much depends on Syria. If Syria is disappearing in that area, I mean, Hezbollah will be in a very much weaker position because of the supply route from Iran, because also the support now gets, I mean, it's really, that's in the public domain.
I mean, David, just to sort of to bring you in on that point. I mean, William Hague, the British Foreign Secretary, made a speech some time ago, a kind of signpost speech, where he said there's a new Cold War in the Middle East. On one side, there's ourselves, the United States, Saudi Arabia, and Israel. On the other side, there's Syria and Iran and Hezbollah and Hamas. Do you see that as the framework within which the Syrian events are now caught?
Absolutely. There's nearly no surprise there whatsoever. Like, we've been hearing the term the axis of resistance for the last, decade or so, and that's true to this day. There's no doubt that there's an effort against Iran, and in order to get at Iran, you really need to take Syria out of the equation and Hezbollah too, if possible. As well as that, I think American foreign policy has been adapted to intervene in countries without actually putting boots on the ground. So if that means funding, elusive organisations in order to effect regime change, then, that's...
Well, are you worried now that as you say, the aim of everybody must be that the Syrian people settle this question? Are you concerned that the kind of internationalisation of the conflict has now made it a cockpit where other people are pursuing other international agendas which have really very little to do with what the Syrian people might want?
The Syrian regime threatened from the first phase of this that he will regionalize and internationalize this problem, and they threatened. And now the clear involvement of Hezbollah and the sectarian tone set by Hezbollah about protecting some secret sanctions like said Zainab or others. And he spoke about the Shia villages. I am aware and I am very learned about these. I know these. They are from my province in Homs. They are not Shia. They are mixture of Sunni Muslims, of Shia and Christians. So the monopolizing of this makes some sort of sense that the aggression and the intervention in the internal issues of Syria, let Hezbollah away, let Iran away, let Russia away, let everybody away. Let's sort our problem. We Syrians, we are seeking freedom and dignity and justice for all, but we want the international community to lift this unfair embargo on us, while the Syrian regime, as I told, have got his own shipments continuously from his own sources.
Dr. Fadel, what do you make of the reports now of increasingly large numbers of Western, indeed of British troops now active in Jordan, training special advisors on the ground and whatnot?
I think because Britain and also America, and always somehow they have partners or friends in the region, and as this conflict is prolonged, obviously they fear that it might spill over into neighboring country, which already, if you take in the refugees, the number of refugees is really nearly close to imbalance in those countries. I mean, that's Jordan, that's small countries like Lebanon, and of course Israel. Also, another Western allies, they don't want to lose in that equation. But I mean, I would expect more Western troops to end up on the border, maybe in the south, because in the north there's a NATO member there. Maybe it's not that in trouble, but. But I think everybody should be worried about the length it has taken, and I have all support for the Syrian people, but I don't really know what's the best way to stop the bloodshed, because I mean, this is not a conventional war that two armies are attacking each other. This is like in people's homes, like on the streets, like kids and women, pregnant women. It's indiscriminate. Everybody gets killed. I mean, it's very strange that the international community really hasn't taken a stronger view how to stop at least the bloodshed. I don't know, maybe a scenario like Libya, not necessarily bombing, but monitoring to see whether there's threats to the civilians, and maybe in that way it can be stopped. But I don't really know. I mean, you can leave the problem for the Syrian people, but it seems to me that stage has passed, because the entire region involved in that conflict, sadly. And now we got into a stage which is very, very complex, and what the way we talk reflects that complexity.
David, you were mentioning the sort of Israeli dimension to this, and recently the Syrian regime withdrew its troops from the Golan Heights. Some commentators, Abdul Bari Atwan here, were suggesting that this was a way of attempting to kind of say essentially to some of the Islamist sections of the opposition, okay, you've been criticising the regime for not dealing with the Israelis, have a go. Is that how you see it?
I don't think there's an interest there to have, on the part of the Syrian government, to have any confrontation with Israel, and I think that goes the other way as well. And as well as that, I don't think Hezbollah either would want any confrontation with Israel.
Okay.
I think all of this is mutual.
Okay, Walid, how did you read that? How did you read the withdrawal of the regime's troops from the Golan?
Sorry?
How did you read the Syrian regime's withdrawal of some of its troops, indeed some of its crack troops from the Golan?
Of course, the Syrian regime now for the last 42 years has got secret agreements and the green lines and red lines with the Israeli. Now he wanted to pose something, to play a game, to make a vacuum in that region. So if anything happened, he will said, look, I've been the best guardian for the borders for the last time. Without me, there will be danger in the region. And we know the games all the regime has played. He played with the Israeli and with the jihadists, as I told. We know that he has created Mahmoud Abu Ghazi in Aleppo in 2003 and 4, and he sent hundreds of people to Iraq, those either killed in Iraq, those who come back have been arrested. I know from Fath al-Islam at least 13 cases how they were recruited by the Syrian regime to go to Fath al-Islam. These games are very well known to us. And after that he said to the West, look, I am the best guardian on the Israeli borders. I am the best guard against terrorism. These claims are very well known.
Okay, well, I'm afraid we're going to have to stop it there because we've run out of time. I hope that you were both informed and enlightened about the situation in Syria from that discussion. Do rejoin us in future editions of The World This Week.